Deep in the storage vaults of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, on a shelf wedged between a cracked alabaster urn and a wooden crate marked only miscellaneous ritual items, Saqqara, 1948, there is a jar. It is roughly 13 centimeters tall. Terracotta, reddish-brown, slightly tapered at the base, wider at the belly, sealed at the top with a plug of dark organic resin. On its exterior, in faint hieratic script, 2 words are scratched near the rim. The museum's registry identifies it as Catalog Item JE 98847, Middle Kingdom Storage Vessel, purpose unknown. It has sat on that shelf, almost entirely unexamined, for over 70 years. Most people walk right past it, but hidden inside it is something that shouldn't exist. In 2019, a digitization project at the museum began using portable X-ray fluorescence scanning to catalog thousands of unexamined storage items. One technician working through crate 47 from the 1948 Saqqara excavation placed the scanner against the belly of JE 98847. What came back stopped her mid-task. Inside the sealed terracotta jar was a copper cylinder. Inside the copper cylinder was an iron rod. Suspended in the center, packed around it was a dark, fibrous organic material. The asphalt seal at the top was intact. Nothing had entered or left that jar since someone packed it shut, approximately 4,000 years ago. That configuration, copper cylinder, iron rod, organic packing, sealed vessel, is the exact structural design of the Baghdad Battery. Not similar, not inspired by it, the same. The Baghdad Battery was discovered in Iraq in 1936, over 3,000 miles from Cairo. And if that's true, it means our history is missing a chapter. If you find this kind of investigation compelling, hit subscribe right now. We do this every week, going into the places history forgot to explain. Let me tell you about the Baghdad Battery, because without understanding it, the jar in that Cairo basement makes no sense. In 1936, archaeologists excavating near the village of Kujit Rabu, about 20 miles south of modern Baghdad, uncovered a series of small clay jars in what appeared to be a Parthian-era burial site from roughly 250 BCE. Austrian archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig examined the jars at the National Museum of Iraq and noticed something deeply odd. Each one contained a copper cylinder. Each cylinder contained an iron rod. Each rod was held in place with an asphalt stopper. The copper cylinder measured approximately 26 millimeters in diameter and 9 centimeters in height. The outer jar stood about 15 centimeters tall. Koenig published his theory in 1940 in the Austrian journal Forschungen und Fortschritte. His claim, these were not storage jars. These were not ritual objects. These were primitive galvanic cells, ancient batteries, capable of generating an electrical current when filled with an acidic liquid. Grape juice, vinegar, diluted fruit acids. Mainstream archaeology cataloged this theory as fringe. The jars were relabeled as scroll containers or vessels for sacred documents, or ritual artifacts with no practical function whatsoever. The battery interpretation was filed away and largely forgotten. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic. Then, modern science found something that changed everything. In 1978, Dr. Arne Egebrecht, director of the Romer und Pelaseus Museum in Hildesheim, Germany, constructed replicas of the Baghdad Battery design and connected several in series. Using grape juice as the electrolyte, his assembled cells generated enough current to electroplate a fine silver coating onto the surface of a small statuette in just 18 hours. The silver layer was 100 nanometers thick, uniform, continuous, indistinguishable from modern electroplating. But that explanation has a problem. Egbrecht's experiment was never documented. No photographs, no written records, no data. According to Bettina Schmitz, a researcher at the same museum who investigated the claim years later, the record is unambiguous. There exists no written documentation of the experiments which took place in 1978. Not even photographs. No researcher since has been able to fully replicate Egebrecht's specific results. The experiment remains simultaneously compelling and unverifiable, a demonstration that apparently happened, with no evidence it happened, inside the very institution responsible for preserving the evidence. Here's where it gets strange. The jar labeled JE 98847 in the Cairo Museum was not found in Parthian Iraq during the modern era. It was found in Pharaonic Egypt, in a sealed side chamber adjacent to the tomb complex of Pharaoh Djedkarre ICC, 5th dynasty, approximately 2380 BCE. That is, 1200 years before the Baghdad Battery. That is roughly 3,000 years before an Italian scientist named Alessandro Volta published the first scientific description of an electrochemical cell in 1799. 3,000 years. The 1948 excavation that uncovered JE 98847 was a British survey of the South Saqqara necropolis. The field notes, archived under reference GI TH1 948 S14 at the Griffith Institute in Oxford, describe the side chamber as a ritual storage annex containing copper offering vessels, alabaster canopic jars, and in the northwest corner, several terracotta containers of uncertain purpose, sealed with what appeared to be organic resin. The excavation team did not open them, they logged them, they shipped them to Cairo, and on that shelf they sat. The 2019 scan did not reveal just one anomalous jar. It revealed three. Three copper and iron sealed configurations, found in the same chamber, from the same tomb complex, from the same dynasty. 3. Scholars have studied them for over a century. Most interpretations are cosmological. Most passages read as prayer, but 3 passages have never been satisfactorily explained. The first comes from the pyramid complex of Pharaoh Unas at Saqqara, the immediate predecessor of Djedkarre ICC. One hieroglyphic sequence translates in its most literal rendering as the copper vessel that contains the Sefer. For over a century, Egyptologists have translated Sefer contextually as breath or divine spirit. But in the 11 surviving texts, where this specific word appears in non-cosmological craft-related contexts, its application is consistently different. In those metallurgical passages, Sefer describes something that flows invisibly and causes metal to change. It is not the word for wind. It is not the word for fire. The most structurally precise translation would be something like unseen current or invisible force that passes through. The copper vessel that contains the unseen current, they weren't guessing, they were recording. The second passage, found in an inscription from the annex chambers of the Pepi I pyramid complex at South Saqqara, 6th dynasty, approximately 2280 BCE, describes the preparation of sacred offering vessels before burial. Egyptological records paraphrase the relevant section this way: "The craftsman of the house of gold shall cause the skin of silver to be laid upon copper, thin as breath, permanent as eternity, by the method of the sealed vessel and the rod of the earth." The rod of the earth, in Egyptian metallurgical texts, refers specifically to iron. Iron, which the ancient Egyptians called bi-nepet, the heavenly ore, the metal of the sky, because virtually all Egyptian iron in this period was meteoric. Iron fell from above. Iron was sacred. Iron was extraordinarily rare. And according to this inscription, iron was being suspended inside sealed copper vessels for the purpose of laying silver onto metal surfaces by the method of the sealed vessel. Not a metaphor, not a ritual image, a process description. The third clue is not textual. It sits in storage crates in London and Cairo and Paris. In 1968 and 1969, archaeologists excavating the North Saqqara necropolis, the same complex where the 5th dynasty pharaohs built their pyramid complexes, recovered a cache of over 100 copper alloy figurines, small objects, ritual in nature, many of them coated with an extremely thin layer of gold. They were removed, cataloged, and distributed between several museum collections across Europe and Egypt. According to the UCL Digital Egypt database, maintained by University College London, which tracks ancient Egyptian material culture, the record for this collection contains the following note. A proper study of the technology, material, or surface treatment of this collection has never been carried out. Over 100 objects found at the same site from the same period, half a century of storage, and not one material study of how their surfaces were treated. Here is what makes that absence significant. The gold coating on several of these objects, visible under modern imaging, displays characteristics inconsistent with fire gilding, the standard documented Egyptian technique. Fire gilding, using mercury amalgam, produces gold layers of variable thickness that pool at edges and thin at raised surfaces. The gold on some of these copper figurines is notably uniform, continuous, thin in a way that suggests not application from the outside, but deposition from an electrochemical process. The same process Egypt claimed to demonstrate in 1978 using a Baghdad Battery replica. The same process apparently described in the pyramid texts of the same necropolis 3,000 years earlier. It was sealed, it was mapped, and then it disappeared from the research agenda. Now, does this prove the most extreme version of the story? Probably not. Ancient Egypt was extraordinarily sophisticated in its use of conventional metallurgy. Fire gilding, beaten gold foil, and mercury amalgam techniques could account for many of the surface treatments we see. The pyramid texts, taken as a whole, are deeply religious documents, and interpreting craft-adjacent passages as technical instruction requires a great deal of interpretive caution. Egypt's undocumented 1978 experiment is not confirmed evidence, and a catalog note saying no material study has been done does not mean the gold coatings are electroplated. It means we haven't checked. Fair points, all of them. But that doesn't make the discovery ordinary. What we can say with confidence is this. 3 sealed copper and iron configuration vessels exist in the Cairo Museum storage system, dated to approximately 2380 BCE. That is the physical reality of JE 98847 and its 2 companion jars. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions from the same era and the same necropolis describe coating silver onto copper surfaces using sealed vessels containing an iron rod. That is the textual reality of the pyramid texts. Over 100 copper alloy figurines from the same site were removed from Saqqara in 1969 and have never been subjected to material surface analysis in the decades since. That is the institutional reality. And Wilhelm König's Baghdad Battery, the Parthian device from 250 BCE that launched this entire line of inquiry, was apparently so unremarkable to the archaeological community that the most compelling experimental demonstration of its function, conducted in 1978 at a German museum, was allowed to happen and then simply not recorded. Not disproven, not debated, not photographed, just allowed to disappear. Think about what this implies at scale. The conventional history of electrochemistry begins in the late 18th century. Volta, Galvani. Faraday, the line of discovery runs in a clean sequence from Europe through modernity, and the assumption underneath all of it is that no one understood the principle before them, that the accumulation of knowledge which produced the battery was a product of a specific intellectual tradition in a specific time and place, with no meaningful predecessors. But König's Baghdad Battery sits in the archaeological record, demonstrating that someone in Parthian Mesopotamia understood the relationship between metals and acid solutions well enough to replicate it in a portable, manufacturable jar. And JE 98847, sits in a basement in Cairo, suggesting that someone 1200 years before that, in Pharaonic Egypt, sealed the same configuration into 3 terracotta vessels and buried them with a pharaoh's funerary equipment. Not discovered, not theorized, known, passed along, buried, lost. And here is the question that has never been satisfactorily answered. What connects them? If sealed copper iron vessels appear in 5th Dynasty Egypt, around 2380 BCE, and the Baghdad Battery appears in Parthian Mesopotamia around 250 BCE, and both cultures produced metal objects with surface treatments we cannot fully explain using known ancient techniques. What knowledge traveled between them? What technique moved quietly along the ancient trade routes from the Nile Valley through the Fertile Crescent, so embedded in practical craft that it was never the subject of a single surviving document that said plainly, "Here is how it works"? What was so ordinary to the people who used it that they never thought to explain it? What was so sacred that they sealed it inside a jar and buried it alongside their dead? JE 98847 is still on that shelf, still sealed, still cataloged as a storage vessel of unknown purpose. The asphalt plug has not been broken. The copper cylinder has not been extracted for oxidation analysis. The iron rod has not been tested to determine whether it once sat immersed in an acid solution. The organic packing material inside has not been identified. The 100 copper figurines from North Saqqara have still not had their surfaces studied. The Griffith Institute archive still holds the 1948 field notes describing 2 additional sealed jars from the same chamber, waiting for someone to ask the next question. And somewhere in the South Saqqara sand, in whatever remains of the sealed annex beside the pyramid of Djedkare Isesi, there may be more. More jars, more copper cylinders, more iron rods packed into terracotta, sealed with asphalt, set beside a dead king who apparently believed he would need them in whatever came next. They are still there, still sealed, still waiting. If this investigation left you with more questions than answers, that's exactly where history begins to crack open. Hit like if this made you think differently. Subscribe so you don't miss where this goes next. And click the video on your screen right now. We're going inside the one sealed chamber at Saqqara that even the most thorough excavators have never fully mapped.